think we're streaming. I think we're going to go with it. Hello. Kay Crystal Griffith here, and welcome to Emotions, Wisdom, and Your Body. So excited today. It's showing transcription finally. I love it when a plan comes together. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. Together, we are going to spend just a few moments and we're going to delve deeper into our emotions and their effects on our body, our soul, and our spirit. And those emotions are your body's wisdom. So here's your disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I'm a researcher. And I find the most random things in the most hidden places. And from that, you will gain education, edification, and encouragement. So let's get started. Today's word is dread. What do you dread? What really makes you kind of stop in your tracks and go, I really don't want to do that? And you really have to push yourself to make it happen. Dread is anticipation with great apprehension, typically with fear. Some feel extreme reluctance to meet or face an event or even a person. The fear is a sharp feeling of danger, and it kicks in an adrenaline response. Dread is a feeling of unease. That's something that it's just not right about a situation or a place or even a person. Dread may be described as kind of a sense of impending doom, an oppressive and an overwhelming force, sucking the joy out of life. Can you imagine that? Or even smothering your enthusiasm for new experiences. Dread may also include being constantly on edge, almost to a heightened alert state. You're always imagining the worst case scenarios and those screen-playing moments of imminent catastrophe in your head. Like you are a walking Hollywood horror movie at times. From a biblical perspective, dread expresses more than even fear and less than terror or fright, though. So the Bible tends to describe each of those separately. It's also an uneasiness or an alarm excited by expected pain, loss, or even evil. We speak of the dread of evil, the dread of suffering, the dread of divine displeasure. I would dread for all of eternity not to be able to visit with the Lord. Can you imagine that? Man, separation from him forever? Not in this house, not for me. It differs from terror, also in being less sudden, but more continued. So dread has a lot of depth to it. Definitely a negative. There's no positive in there. Now, this was kind of interesting. I want to talk about the body effects. There was a review in an MIT journal that cited the dread activated brain is similar to those associated with pain. Isn't that interesting? Dread equates to pain in the same way in our brain. And that people who rated a waiting period as the most unbearable had more activity in that part of the brain's pain circuit that mediates attention. Dread has a connection to attention in your brain. They say the findings could help explain how people make some decisions, such as dieting, even buying stocks. You would think that would be an easy thing, right? Which involve a long waiting period before seeing results. So you start this new diet, you're working, you're doing all this, and every time you step on the scale, you're expecting a big change and you're not seeing it. And that dread begins to pile up. And then it creates almost a pain effect in the brain. So then to diet inflicts pain in your brain somehow to your body. This is like insane, isn't it? Right? So they figured out that some people found waiting so unpleasant that they were willing to take a shock. So they ran this experiment and they said, okay, you can have this bigger shock with less time, or you can have this lesser shock over a long period of time. And that lesser shock, but because they had to wait for the lesser shock, was worse in their brain than getting a bigger shock in a shorter amount of time, and a shock being like a zap. That's crazy, right? But they were willing to do that. They were willing to take that bigger shock, even though it was going to cause more pain, because they couldn't take the waiting period, right? It's that waiting that was killing them. And sometimes, often enough, when we're in this waiting period, guess who begins to get antsy? We do. And then we begin to take it on ourselves as somehow we're going to make it happen, we're going to fix it, or we're going to cause the action to happen so we don't have to wait. That's really what we're talking about here. Basically, we decide to be our own God. We're going to take matters into our own hands, just so we're not dreading things anymore. This is not a good combination. So, dread was neurologically distinct from both fear and anxiety in this testing, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about biblically. It's different between each one of those. And an area of the brain called your amygdala plays a key role in regulating those emotions we've talked about, such as fear. Now, this is kind of interesting. That amygdala with dread was not more active with extreme dreaders, the people who have this impending sense of doom all the time. So their amygdala is not worse. Their pain level is worse, but the amygdala is not. Isn't that fascinating? So let's talk about too much dread. Can we have too much dread? Probably so. The majority of people will actually opt out to accelerate the onset of pain just so they don't have to endure that long waiting period, right? From that indicates that expectation of pain can cause a great deal of misery. Ooh, there's a lovely word that we just tied into dread. Misery. You're absolutely miserable while you're waiting for this thing to happen that you know is just going to happen, right? All right. So the main point here is that what you're expecting, if it's something that you're going to dread, if you're expecting something with that dread, your anxiety can absolutely be downright nerve-wracking, to the point it can cause you to actually have a variety of physical symptoms that we're talking about with anxiety, with anticipation, with fear. We've talked about them all, that can create strokes and heart attacks and high blood pressure. So it can become so bad, you can set yourself into a heart attack. Guys, this is not a good plan. We have to deal with this dread, right? Because it's almost as if the dread is worse than the fear. Is that even possible? And yet here we are. It is, because dread activates the pain center. Fear does not. So let's talk about how do we counteract dread. So dread has more to do with the attention piece, remember, how long you're waiting, than the actual emotion. So if you could distract yourself in some way, you could get rid of some of those dread responses to your body, including the pain center. So here's some ideas. If feelings of dread are holding you hostage, because that's really what it comes down to, a bondage situation with dread, here's some ideas to counteract them. Obviously, avoid anxiety, right? Like sometimes I know for my kiddo, if she's got this big project and it just drags and drags and drags and drags, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger into her mind, into her vision, into her perception. It worms its way into robbing her of sleep. So if we can sit down and one day chunk out different parts of it, or on her calendar, chunk out different parts of that project, then her dread is not so severe. Her pain level is not so severe as far as what that dread is bringing to the table in anxiety and waiting period. And she feels like she is able to handle things better. Well, isn't that true of all of us, really? If we know how to break down a project, if we know how to break down a situation, or even insurance paperwork, oh my gosh, won't that just like drive you nuts? Right? So even if we sit down and we break that out and go, okay, from on Mondays from 9 to 10, I'm going to handle these particular phone calls. I'm going to get as many done as I possibly can. And that's going to be the hour I spend on it. And so we know that that is the set aside time. So we're planning for it. So we're avoiding the anxiety of having to do it. We're planning for it. We know in that hour, we're going to get it done. And then once that hour is up, we're going to move to the next project. and we know that we have done what we needed to do for the day. So that helps you avoid that anxiety. If it's an event, admittedly, even a minor event, think of times in your life where you would love to have traded places with somebody. Part of that goes back to our gratitude conversation. If we can think in terms of an event where we had gratitude in a similar situation, we can allow that joy to come in, that gratitude to come in. And remember, when we have that gratitude emotion spike, it can actually last us for several weeks. Well, that's going to far outweigh this dread piece, right? What if you thought about the situation where you've lived through worse than this? So for example, 2020 quarantine. I got it before it was a name. They called it super nasty lung virus. They even had me on the phone with my parents trying to figure out how to write a will by a phone because mine hadn't been updated yet. And you know, the fact is, when you're faced with blood clots in your lungs, your time is probably going to be limited. And so having to live through that, I had to go, okay, is this really the worst thing I've ever been through? Because finding melanoma stage 4 on my head within just 30 short days of having had an entire body scan seemed worse to me in the moment. And so when I could compare that, I could then take a breath. And so now everybody's situations are going to be different, and what you compare it to is going to be different. But I want to just challenge you to think about that perspective, though. If you were in a situation where you're dreading something, really think about something that was worse than this. What was a 10? And if you compared that really bad situation, like it was a 10 plus, like it could not have gotten worse, right? What is this? What you're facing in that moment really compared to that? Could be actually maybe a 2. So another example, ask yourself, is this dread coming from a lack of self-confidence, especially in public speaking? A lot of people dread sharing lives like this on Facebook. They dread sharing their heart. They dread, what if somebody finds this out about me? What if they find out about that skeleton in my closet? Let me guess. I just want to let you guys to know something here. God knows all your skeletons. And if you are who you are, walking in integrity with him, he's going to use all things to his good and glory. Romans 8:28. Everything. Nothing is going to be off the table. Every single thing you have ever experienced in your life, he will use to your good and glory for his good and glory. I promise. It's going to be amazing. But you got to trust him with it. And so the more that we decide to hide those things in the closet, trust me, they will come out. They will. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but what is done in the dark always comes to light. So just own it. Just own it and get out there and just deal with it. I'm telling you, it'll be worth it. Much better to do that. Now, another perspective, and this is not for everybody, you can soothe your nerves by really asking yourself, what's the worst that could happen here? So in the grand scheme of things, as I'm laying there with these blood clots and what I'm dealing with, and my kid and my good friend was there in the ER, and I'm like, Lord, well, maybe I'm coming to see you sooner than I thought. And for me, that wasn't the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen was I'd be an invalid here and not be able to help my kid. So to me, dying wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me. So everybody's a little different in their understanding of what the worst thing is that could happen. So I don't want to belittle any of those ideas, but I just want you to really think about what is the worst thing that could happen. And in reality, is that what's going to happen? So another one is find the silver lining. Even in the worst rainstorm, we went camping one time in Florida. We didn't even know it was going to rain. This is pre-internet days, just wanted to go camping. And we heard the rain clouds come as we're setting up the tent. We're like, okay, we'll get everything in the tent. It'll be great. Excuse me, 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, there was about 6 inches of water. Our trunk was floating. Our sleeping bags were floating. We somehow managed to be in the middle of like a mini hurricane. It was the craziest thing ever. So we quickly ran to the car and went like, yeah, we're just going to pack everything up when this passes and we'll just go home. You never know where it's going to be, but we have a great story to tell out of it. We went camping in a hurricane. It was great. Be smart about where you put your energy, folks. Are you going to dread? Are you going to waste that energy? Are you going to allow people to take up root in your brain when really they could care less about you and whatever happened? I'm just saying, be smart. Now, the opposite of dread is confidence, bravery, calmness, contentment, courage, and happiness, want, and welcoming. So here are your wisdom verses for the day. Deuteronomy 1:29. Then I said unto you, dread not. The Lord kind of spoke to it right there. Dread not. Neither be afraid. Remember, dread's dealing with the pain, afraid's dealing with the fear, two completely different things. All right. 1 Chronicles 22:13, be strong and of good courage. Dread not, nor be dismayed. So you heard it right from the horse's mouth upstairs. You might not want to try. Now, how to use this new information on dread, because wisdom is not just the hearing, but the understanding and the application. So I want to encourage you to ask the Lord more about dread. Ask him, how has this emotion been showing up in your life? It's a sneaky little guy, more than you even realize. If you've been in a car accident, trust me, you dread getting back in that car probably after the first, second, or third time that you get in. And then if it happened while you were driving, you dread it even more to get behind the wheel. And it's that same concept of when the horse bucks you off, what's the first thing you need to do? Get back on the horse. That's why. That is exactly why you have to get back up right immediately and get back on that horse, because of dread. We don't want it to take up root, right? Now, your second question, how has dread been in your life, as a positive or a negative? And why? And your third question, how can you transform dread by wisdom, understanding, and knowledge as you move forward in the future? Don't forget, take the scriptures, drop your names in there and personalize it. And he wrote it just for you. Those are promises for you. So go live, share with us the most unexpected thing that you learned about dread today. That whole pain concept, that was brand spanking new to me as I was doing this research. So tomorrow's word identifies an emotion of what we have when we dread being in the presence or present with someone else who may have something that you want. Anybody have any ideas what that might be? Another word might be covet. Pretty sure that's one of those commands. It's jealousy. We're going to talk about jealousy. Because if we know we're going into a situation where somebody you feel compared to, you feel unworthy around, which is a whole nother word, you will be jealous of them. And you will dread going to be with them. And you won't be able to enjoy yourself. Learn how to enjoy yourself. Stop the dreading, right? And let's get rid of the jealousy. So join us tomorrow again for Emotions, Wisdom, in Your Body. Register at crystalgriffith.com to receive more insights and your feelings wheel. And I can tell that this transcription is not perfect. So just offer me some grace. We're working on it. You guys have a blessed day. Take care.